There is a moment just before everything changes, when the air goes still. You feel it, don't you? Something deep inside you, like a quiet hum beneath the noise of your daily life, whispering that you are not here by accident, that your name was written somewhere long before you were born, that tonight, yes, tonight, something is shifting in the unseen world, and it is shifting specifically for you. This is not a coincidence that you are watching this right now. The chosen ones rarely stumble upon truth, they are led to it. Stay with me, because what I am about to share with you goes far deeper than anything you have heard before. This is not a motivational speech. This is not a sermon. This is a revelation, carefully hidden in the oldest pages ever written, finally surfacing in a time when the world desperately needs to understand it. God has already decided, and what He has decided concerns you directly. Let me take you somewhere for a moment. Imagine a vast, dark sky. No moon, no city lights, just the raw, ancient black of night above a desert. In that desert, an old man is lying on his back, staring upward. His name is Abraham. His wife is barren, his tent is small, his circumstances are utterly impossible by any human measure, and yet the voice that speaks from that darkness does not say, maybe, or if you are good enough, or if things work out. The voice simply says, look up, count the stars if you are able, so shall your descendants be. That was not a prayer request being considered, that was a verdict, a declaration, a decision already made in the eternal courts before Abraham ever opened his mouth. And that is exactly where we begin tonight. There is a phrase buried inside the New Testament, spoken by the Apostle Paul, that has quietly stunned theologians and mystics and ordinary believers for 2,000 years. It comes from the book of Romans, chapter 8, verses 29 and 30, and when you truly let it sink in, really let it settle into your chest, it changes everything you thought you knew about your life and your place in this story. Paul writes, "For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined, and those whom he predestined, he also called, and those whom he called, he also justified, and those whom he justified, he also glorified." Read that again slowly. Foreknew, predestined, called, justified, glorified. This is not a sequence of events that begins in your lifetime. This is a chain that was forged before time had a name, before the earth had a shape, before light separated from darkness on that very first cosmic morning. God did not look ahead at your life and make a conditional bet on you. He looked at you, fully, completely, without illusion, and He chose you anyway. That is the staggering weight of what is written there. Not because you deserved it, not because you earned it, but because that is simply what He decided to do. And here is what most people miss entirely, what most teachers gloss over too quickly to ever let it land. The word glorified in that verse is written in the past tense. Glorified, not will be glorified, already glorified. In God's perspective, in the realm where He exists beyond time and above it, the conclusion of your story is already written, and it ends in glory. Now I need to pause here because I know what you might be thinking. You might be sitting there with the weight of something very specific pressing on your shoulders, a door that will not open, a relationship that feels broken beyond repair, a dream you have quietly given up on, a version of yourself you cannot seem to become. And you are wondering, does any of this apply to me? Is this for me? Let me answer that with another story. His name was Gideon. And when the angel of the Lord found him, he was not standing on a hilltop with his arms raised in worship. He was hiding, literally hiding, threshing wheat inside a winepress, which was a small pit in the ground, because he was terrified of the Midianites who kept raiding and destroying everything his people had worked for. He was afraid, he was small, he was invisible by choice. And the angel's greeting, the very first words spoken to this frightened, hiding young man were, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Gideon looked around, confused, and said essentially, "Mighty warrior? Have you met me? My clan is the weakest in our tribe. I am the least in my father's house. Where are all the miracles we used to hear about? If God is with us, why is everything so bad?" And here is what strikes me like lightning every single time I read it. God does not correct him. God does not say, "Well, fair point, let me reconsider." God simply says, "Go in the strength you have. I am sending you." Not the strength Gideon wished he had, not the strength Gideon planned to develop, the strength he already possessed. Go in that. Because what God saw in Gideon was not what Gideon saw in Gideon. God saw the chosen version, the decided version, the already glorified version, and he spoke to that version while Gideon was still crouching in the dirt. That is how God works. He calls the thing that is not as though it already is. He speaks futures as present realities, because from where he stands, there is no gap between what he decided and what will come to pass. This is not poetry, this is principle, and it is written throughout the scriptures so consistently that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Joseph, a 17-year-old boy in a colorful robe, full of dreams, beloved by his father. He tells his brothers about a dream, stars and sheaves bowing before him, and the reaction is hatred, raw, burning, ancient jealousy that drives his own flesh and blood to throw him into a pit and sell him to strangers for 20 pieces of silver. From that pit, he goes to slavery. From slavery, he is falsely accused and sent to prison. From prison, he is forgotten. A man he helped, a fellow prisoner, promised to remember him to Pharaoh and then forgets entirely for 2 full years. 2 years of silence. 2 years of the ceiling of a cell instead of the open sky of his dreams.
And yet, and this is the part that should stop your breath, not one single thing that happened to Joseph delayed the dream by even 1 day. Because the dream was not Joseph's plan, it was God's decision. And what God decides, the enemy cannot cancel. What God decides, betrayal cannot prevent. What God decides, your own mistakes cannot fully derail. Joseph eventually stood before Pharaoh, interpreted a dream about 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine, and was elevated in a single afternoon to the second most powerful position in the known world. And when his brothers came to him trembling, expecting revenge, Joseph said something that I want you to sit with deeply. He said, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done." You intended, God intended. 2 intentions, same events, completely different purposes. Every moment of suffering in Joseph's story was simultaneously a moment of precise divine navigation. The pit was a passageway, the prison was a preparation room, the silence was not abandonment, it was curriculum. Every door that closed was closing only because the right door required him to be somewhere else first. And now I want to ask you something directly. What if the very thing in your life right now that feels most like a closed door, most like a setback, most like evidence that it is not going to work out, what if that is the prison before the palace? What if the forgetting is actually the last exam before the elevation? What if God decided your outcome long before your obstacle arrived? Because that is precisely what the scriptures are telling us, over and over, in 100 different voices and 100 different stories. The pattern is undeniable. The chosen ones do not have easy paths, they have decided destinations. There is a distinction there that I need you to feel, not just understand. An easy path would remove the difficulty. A decided destination sanctifies it. It takes the difficulty and makes it part of the process. It takes the waiting and turns it into precision timing. It takes the confusion and reveals that you were never actually lost. You were being led somewhere that required a particular route. Think about Moses. Here is a man who spent 40 years in the palace of Pharaoh, trained in the finest wisdom and strategy of the most powerful empire on earth. He kills an Egyptian who is abusing a Hebrew slave, an act of justice, of passion, of identity, and flees into the desert believing his life is over. He is done. He is a fugitive. He is a shepherd in the wilderness for another 40 years, tending sheep for his father-in-law, a long, long way from the power he once knew. 80 years old, by any reasonable calculation, this man's window had passed, his moment had come and gone. And then a bush catches fire and does not burn, and a voice from within that fire calls his name. Moses, Moses. 80 years of preparation for a conversation that would redefine history. And Moses himself protests, "I am not eloquent, I stutter, I am not the right person." And God says, "Who made your mouth? Go, I will be with your mouth, I will teach you what to say." Every limitation Moses named, God simply absorbed into the mission. Your limitation is not disqualifying you, it is making you more dependent on the source of the calling. Because the chosen ones were never meant to do it in their own power anyway. That is the whole point. That is why God does not always choose the most qualified. He chooses the most yielded. And He has already decided who will yield to Him and bear fruit. He sees it, He knows it, He has written it. Now let us go deeper, because there is a mystery inside this idea of being chosen that most people stop before they reach, and it lives inside the words of Jesus Himself. In the Gospel of John, chapter 15, verse 16, Jesus is speaking to His disciples on what would be the last night of His life before the arrest. The weight of what is coming is already pressing. The atmosphere in that upper room is thick with unspoken things. And in the middle of all of that, He says something remarkable. He says, "You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last. You did not choose me, I chose you." This is not pride. This is not exclusivity in the way humans perform it. This is Jesus dismantling the fundamental human assumption that our spiritual lives begin with our decision. He is saying your decision was a response. I moved first. I reached first. The inclination you feel towards truth, towards something more, towards the sacred, that inclination itself is a sign of election. You were drawn before you decided to walk. And then He says, appointed you to bear fruit that will last. Not fruit that will impress people, not fruit that trends, fruit that lasts, eternal fruit. Fruit that outlives your body, your generation, your era. The work that God decided you would do is the kind that time cannot touch, the kind that ripples forward into eternities you will never see from here, but that you set in motion tonight. That is the weight of being chosen. It is not a privilege without purpose. It is a calling, a mandate, an appointment. And appointments by their very nature require your presence. This is the part where I want you to lean in very closely, because I think this is the thing that most separates the chosen ones who walk fully in what was decided for them, from those who spend their whole lives brushing up against it without ever stepping inside. The decision has already been made, but the experience of that decision requires your participation. Let me show you what I mean through the story of Esther. A young Jewish woman raised by her cousin Mordecai, orphaned early in life, finding herself through a series of events that are almost impossible to call coincidental, placed in the palace of the Persian king Ahasuerus and elevated to the position of queen. She has power, access, safety, as long as she keeps her Jewish identity secret. But then a man named Haman, driven by pride and hatred, plots to destroy every Jewish person in the Persian Empire. And Mordecai goes to Esther with the impossible ask, "Go to the king, intercede for your people." And Esther says to him, and this is one of the most profound things ever written in the Hebrew Scriptures, "Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? Who knows but that you have come to this place for such a time as this? Deliverance will come either way. God's decision will not fail. But you specifically were placed in this position for this particular moment. And if you choose fear over calling, if you choose silence over purpose, the mission still gets accomplished, but you will have missed the appointment you were made for."
This is the most sobering and most electrifying sentence in the whole story of Esther. It is simultaneously a warning and an invitation. Do not miss your moment. The moment is already here, and it was designed with your name on it. Esther calls a 3-day fast. She prepares herself. She steps forward and she says the most courageous words a queen has ever spoken. "If I perish, I perish." Total surrender to the mission, total release of self-preservation, total trust in the one who placed her there. And the king extends the golden scepter, and Haman is exposed, and the Jewish people are saved, and Esther becomes eternal, not because she was the most powerful person in the room, but because she showed up for the appointment that had always been waiting for her. Your appointment is waiting. I need to slow down here and talk to you about something that I believe is one of the most misunderstood aspects of this whole sacred conversation, and that is the relationship between divine selection and personal suffering. Because here is what happens to almost every person who begins to understand that they carry something chosen within them. They expect the path to get easier. They expect confirmation to come in the form of open doors and smooth roads. And when the opposite happens, when the opposition increases, when the confusion deepens, when the suffering feels more acute rather than less, they conclude that they must have been wrong, that maybe they are not chosen after all, that maybe they misread something. But the Scriptures tell a completely different story. Look at the Apostle Paul. This is a man who had a literal encounter with the risen Christ on the road to Damascus. Blinding light, voice from heaven, a complete reversal of everything he thought was true. He dedicated the rest of his life to spreading a message that had genuinely transformed him from the inside out. And his life after that moment? Shipwrecked, beaten with rods, stoned and left for dead, imprisoned, betrayed by false brothers, hungry, cold, in danger in every city. And yet he writes, and this is from 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 8 and 9, "We are hard-pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed." Notice that he does not say we are never hard-pressed. He says we are not crushed. He does not say we are never perplexed. He says we are not in despair. The chosen life is not a life without opposition. It is a life where the opposition never gets the final word, because the final word was already spoken before any of this began. There is a passage in Isaiah chapter 46, verses 9 and 10, where God speaks in a way that should make every human soul pause in wonder. He says, "I am God, and there is no other. I am God, and there is none like me. I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times what is still to come.
I say, my purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please. My purpose will stand. Not my purpose will stand if circumstances cooperate. Not my purpose will stand if people make the right choices. My purpose will stand. Full stop. Absolute declarative sentence. The God who spoke that is not reacting to your situation. He is not scrambling to adjust his plans because of what happened to you last month or last year or in the darkest chapter of your life. He declared the end from the beginning. He is holding both ends of your story in his hands simultaneously. And what he decided, the good he declared over you, will stand. But here is what I want you to understand with everything in you. That verse does not make you passive. It makes you fearless. It does not mean you sit still and wait for things to happen. It means you move boldly, knowing that the one who decided your outcome is already at the destination, making sure it is exactly as he promised. Think of it this way. When you board a plane and you trust the pilot, you do not spend the entire flight in the cockpit trying to steer. But you also do not stay in your seat paralyzed, convinced you're going to crash. You participate in the journey. You rest. You eat. You look out the window. You prepare for what happens when you land. You are active, present, and engaged, while simultaneously trusting the one who holds the controls. That is the posture of the chosen one who walks in what was decided. Active trust, engaged surrender, passionate participation in a story whose ending is already secure. Now, let me take you to a moment in Scripture that I believe captures this tension more beautifully than almost any other. It is found in the Gospel of John, chapter 11. A man named Lazarus is sick. His sisters, Mary and Martha, send word to Jesus, "The one you love is sick. Come quickly." They know who Jesus is. They have seen what he can do. They trust him. They believe. And Jesus receives the message, and then, John records this so deliberately, Jesus stayed where he was 2 more days. 2 more days. By the time he arrives, Lazarus has been in the tomb for 4 days. Martha runs out to meet him and says, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." If you had been here. She is not wrong, and Jesus does not rebuke her grief. He weeps with her. He is moved by the weight of human sorrow. He does not dismiss the pain with a theological lecture. He enters into it. But then he says something that shatters the moment open. He says, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" And then he stands before a sealed tomb and calls out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." And the dead man walks out. Now, why did Jesus wait? Why did he stay 2 more days when he knew that every hour of delay meant more grief for people he loved? The answer is in verse 4, which Jesus speaks at the very beginning of the story, before he even sets out. He says, "This sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory." He did not say this sickness will not get worse. He did not say there will not be suffering. He said it will not end in death. He had already declared the outcome before the situation reached its worst point. That's the heart of what I'm trying to tell you tonight. Your situation may have gotten worse before this moment. Things may look more buried than ever. The stone may feel sealed. The silence may feel permanent. But if God spoke a word over your life, if he drew you toward purpose, toward calling, toward something sacred, then whatever tomb you are standing in front of right now is not the ending. It is the location where the miracle will happen. The delay was not distance, it was precision. And what God is about to call out of your situation will be so unmistakably His power, so obviously beyond human capability, that no one will be able to explain it away. Like Lazarus, who had been dead 4 days, well past the point where even the closest mourners held any hope, what comes out of your story will carry the unmistakable signature of the divine. Let me speak to something else now, something that I believe is quietly attacking the hearts of the chosen ones in this particular season of history. And that is the weight of comparison. The quiet, corrosive question, but what about them? Why does it seem to work so easily for others? Why does it look like they're moving forward while I'm standing still? Why are they seeing the breakthrough and I'm still waiting? This question has destroyed more callings than almost anything else. Not because it is asked, questioning is healthy, honest, human, but because it is often answered incorrectly. It is answered with the conclusion that you must be lacking something they have, or that you must have done something wrong, or perhaps God's decision was stronger for them than for you.
But the parable of the workers in the vineyard in Matthew 20 speaks directly into this. Workers hired at different hours of the day, some laboring since dawn, others arriving at the final hour, all receiving the same payment at the end. And the ones who worked longest were offended. They expected more. And the owner of the vineyard said simply, "Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Did I not give you what we agreed?" The message is not that all paths are identical. The message is that divine generosity is not constrained by your timeline or mine. The measure of what God decided for you is not diminished one fraction by what He decided for someone else. His abundance is not a finite resource that gets divided and depleted. It is infinite. His decision for your life takes nothing from His decision for theirs. Run your race. Stay in your lane. Not because others do not matter, they deeply do, but because the lane you are in was custom designed for the specific destination that was decided for you specifically. And the only way to miss it is to spend your energy watching someone else's race. There is a beautiful and often overlooked verse in the first chapter of Jeremiah, verse 5. God speaks to this young prophet who will face rejection and imprisonment and heartbreak throughout his entire ministry. And before any of that happens, before Jeremiah has even begun, God says, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I set you apart. I appointed you as a prophet to the nations." Before I formed you, before you were born. The calling came before the person was even a physical reality. Jeremiah did not apply for the position. Jeremiah did not earn his way into the role. The decision was made in eternity, and then a human life was constructed around it, built to carry it, shaped to bear it, refined through circumstances specifically arranged to make him into the vessel the calling required. That is you. That is the architecture of your existence. You were not born first and then given a purpose as an afterthought. The purpose came first, and then you were formed, uniquely, specifically, with particular gifts and a particular story and particular experiences to be the exact vessel that this particular calling fits. This is why your background is not a disqualification. It is part of the equipment. This is why the hardest thing you ever went through was not a waste. It was part of the formation. This is why the very things you feel most insecure about, the things you think make you less qualified, are often precisely what make you the right person for what God decided. Moses had a speech impediment and led the greatest liberation in human history. David was the youngest of 8 brothers, dismissed so thoroughly that his own father did not even call him in from the fields when Samuel chose a king. Ruth was a foreign widow from a despised nation, and she becomes the great-grandmother of King David himself, and therefore an ancestor of Jesus. None of the human calculations made any sense, because divine selection has never been a human calculation.
Now, I want to address the question of faith, because everything I have shared with you tonight, every story, every verse, every principle, requires something of you, not in order to earn what has been decided, that would contradict the entire point, but in order to walk in it, in order to live from within it, rather than perpetually reaching for it from the outside. The writer of Hebrews in chapter 11, verse 1, gives us one of the most powerful definitions ever written. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not yet seen. Substance, evidence. These are not soft, emotional words. These are legal, material, concrete words. Faith is described here as something with substance, with actual weight and form in the spiritual realm. When you believe what God decided over your life, when you hold to it in the face of contradiction, that belief is not wishful thinking. It is substance. It is evidence that something real and decided exists, even if your physical eyes cannot perceive it yet. This is why the chosen ones must learn to walk by something other than what they see, not because reality does not matter, it does, but because the fullest, truest reality is the one that was decided before any of your current circumstances existed. The seen world is temporary, the decided word is eternal. And faith is the capacity to let the eternal word hold more weight in your decisions than the temporary circumstances do. This is not easy. I want to be honest with you. There are nights when this is deeply, genuinely, painfully difficult, when the gap between what was promised and what is visible feels so vast that the doubt is not a thought, it is a sensation in your body, a heaviness that makes the air feel thick. Those nights are real. They are part of the journey. The Psalms are full of them. My God, why have you forsaken me?" is a line from Psalm 22, written by David, but it is also the cry of Jesus from the cross. Even the Son of God, in the full humanity of that moment, cried out into the darkness with the feeling of being forsaken. And yet the psalm does not end in despair. It ends in triumph. For he has not despised or scorned the suffering of the afflicted one. He has not hidden his face from him, but has listened to his cry for help. The feeling of forsakenness and the fact of divine faithfulness exist simultaneously. The feeling is real. The faith is realer. And when you choose, in the middle of the dark night, to declare what God decided rather than what your circumstances are announcing, something shifts. Not always immediately in the seen world, but always in the unseen one. Because your declaration of faith is not you trying to convince God. God is already convinced. He decided. Your declaration is you aligning your voice with His verdict, and there is enormous power in that alignment. I want to close by bringing all of this to the moment you are actually in right now. Not a historical moment, not an abstract theological moment. The specific Tuesday or Friday or Sunday night when you pressed play on this video and your soul leaned forward because something in the title reached into a part of you that has been waiting and longing and believing even when it felt unreasonable to believe. The feeling that brought you here is not random. The hunger that keeps you seeking is not an accident. The fact that in a world full of distractions and noise and 10,000 other things competing for your attention, something in you said, "I need to hear this," that is not coincidence. That is the echo of a decision made before time began. That is the shepherd calling the sheep that belong to him, and the sheep knowing the voice even before they can fully explain why. You are not too late. You have not gone too far. You have not made too many mistakes. The Beloved did not love you because you were perfect. He loved you before you were anything at all. And His love is not the kind that changes with your performance. It is the kind that was decided before you had any performance to offer. This is the God who told Abraham, "You will have descendants like the stars," when Abraham was old and his body, as Paul writes in Romans, was as good as dead. This is the God who told Gideon, "You are a mighty warrior," while Gideon was hiding. This is the God who told Joseph, "You will be lifted up," while Joseph was in the pit. This is the God who told Esther, "You were made for this moment," while Esther was paralyzed by fear. This is the God who called Moses, "I am sending you," when Moses felt entirely unfit. This is the God who says to you tonight, "I formed you, I knew you, I appointed you, and I have already decided that what I began in you, I will complete." Philippians chapter 1 verse 6 says, "He who began a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ Jesus." Will carry it on, not might, not if you perform well enough, will. That is not a possibility. That is a promise from a God who cannot lie, spoken over a life that he decided was worth the full commitment of his power and purpose and presence. Tonight changes everything, not because the circumstances change tonight, though they might, not because the answer arrives tonight, though it could. Tonight changes everything because you are choosing to align yourself with the truth of what was decided over your life. You are choosing to walk into the rest of this season, not as someone hoping to be chosen, but as someone who was chosen before they took their first breath, and who is only now beginning to understand what that means. The chosen ones are not perfect people. They are surrendered people. They are people who looked at the gap between their current reality and God's declared promise and chose, sometimes barely, sometimes with tears streaming, to believe the promise anyway. They are people like you, in a moment like this, saying with everything in them, "I receive what you decided. I will walk in it. I will not let fear or delay or doubt or comparison or failure write the final sentence of my story, because you already did, and what you wrote is good. Go forward. The appointment is real. The mission was assigned before you were formed. The fruit you were meant to bear is waiting on the other side of your surrender. The palace is on the other side of the prison. The parting of the sea is just ahead of the Egyptian army behind you. The resurrection is on the other side of the sealed stone. You are not waiting to be chosen. You were chosen before you ever knew to want it. And tonight, right now, that decision is alive in you, moving, calling, drawing you forward into the fullness of everything that was already written in your name. Walk in it with everything you have.